Okay, so we've just finished looking at an overview of St. Thomas's look at um, our final and happiness. And now we're going to look at um, some of what St. Thomas says a little more deeply. And we're going to have there's going to be a focus on this because this is all geared towards the next paper I want you to write. And I'm putting the paper assignment right here for you to look at. Okay, so the basic question is, can philosophy get us to heaven? Or in St. Thomas's terms, can philosophy get us to beatitude? And the reason why I'm asking this is coming off this quote from the Phaedo, which you may or may not remember. Socrates says that the real philosopher has reason to be of good cheer when he is about to die, and that after death he may obtain or hope to obtain the greatest good in the other world. So philosophy was a kind of secular salvation, according to Socrates. At least that's one way to interpret this. And so I want you to think about, from the point of view of St. Thomas, what would he say about this? Would he agree with this or not? So for St. Thomas, saints are the people that get to heaven. So is the philosopher a saint, or is philosophy a different sort of animal? And I don't think it's a simple question, but we'll see. So I gave you this piece to look at by a guy named D.Q. McInerney. I don't know what the Q stands for, but it's a kind of a summary of the first five questions, which will probably get us into it a lot quicker than if we had to slog through some of St. Thomas's work, which is much more involved, and I don't know if that's totally necessary here. So what I propose to do in the next two or three videos is to just look at this piece that I assigned you and highlight a few things, okay, with our question in mind, okay? So hopefully this will set you up to go out and write a paper um, about this topic, okay? So we saw in that video that the classic question of ethics is all about what is the goal of human life? And secondly, how do we achieve it? So happiness is that question. What is the goal of human life? And so this is the treatise on happiness. And there's a lot of tie-ins between this and between Boethius, particularly book 3 of the Consolation. So that's why a lot of these things I will just go over a lot more quickly because we've seen the issue. So in the first two sections here, um, called The Nature of Ends and The Nature of the Final End. And these are probably the most technical, I think, of this piece. The question is talking about the final end. And the first point that McInerney makes from St. Thomas is there an end of human life? Is that sort of a silly question? And in some ways, I think he thinks it is. It's an obvious question, he says, um, that there's a built-in purpose. And we saw this stated by Boethius at the very beginning of book 3. Here's a quote from the very first page of this work, page 17. It would be very difficult to sustain at any length of time the belief that human life is completely without purpose. And even those devoted cynics, a cynic is a person who thinks uh, that nothing is really true, who tenaciously hold to a theory of life that life is purposeless, nonetheless go about their daily affairs as if just the opposite were the case. They may preach purposelessness, but they act purposefully. Okay, so the question of whether there is a final end to human life, at least as is being portrayed here, is obviously yes. And people who deny it don't really live their denial. They're hypocrites. Okay, that's something to think about. So this is not a religious point. This is meant to be a philosophical point, just as it was in Boethius. Okay, the second point made is um, purpose. We said purpose is built in. The second point is that we can still have a purpose without knowing what that purpose is. I think the video you might remember, or I think it was the video on St. Thomas's proof for God's existence, talked a little bit about confused knowledge. We have, naturally, We have a goal. Naturally, the goal is God, but that doesn't mean everybody is aware of that or knows it, and that's possible. So one can firmly believe that human life is purposeful without being at all clear as to what that means. So this is an interesting point, and it does cover a lot of objections. The first, if life has a purpose, how come I don't know about it? I've never heard about it before. People disagree about that. None of that disproves the point. That's the important philosophical. Okay. Third point is you can't really give an answer to what the purpose of human life is without, first of all, having some knowledge about human nature. Okay. So the second paragraph, page 17, starts getting into this question: what is human nature? And we learn that human nature is rational. I don't know if we would disagree with that. We learn that it's consciously purposeful. Um, we learn that human acts are willed acts, deliberate acts, acts that we choose. Okay. And it kind of moves kind of quickly to try to take all the different things that we choose and to characterize them in a very general way. So we find out near the bottom of 18 that the two key pieces of human nature are intellect and will. And that means that the intellect is looking for truth and the will is looking for good. And they work in conjunction in our lives so that we get to this summary point raised on page 19. It is our perception of things as good. So perception is seeing them that they're good, that energizes us to go after them and make them our own, to conjoin ourselves with them, to be they things of large consequence or small, be they things we can attain fairly effortlessly simply by reaching out a hand to them, or things that can be attained only after years of assiduous and persevering labor. Okay, so what we are trying to do in life is learn the truth, and particularly the truth about the good, so that we can achieve the good. Okay, it's an abstract way of putting it, but I think it's fairly easy to translate that into what's happening in our lives. And then the final point, this is a more difficult point, is that there would have to be a single end of human life. There can't just be a bunch of ends. But the first point we're making here is that it's got to be a particular end, and not something that we can choose, that it's given to us. It provides the fundamental rationale for existence. The essential meaning of man, McInerney writes, individually and collectively, is that he is a creature who is oriented toward a supreme good which dominates all the particular goods that constitute his life, and the attainment of which is absolutely essential to his fulfillment as a human being. Now, the next line is to say that man was created by God. So there's a religious claim there that we Christians believe that God created the world, and Christians believe that God created the world for a reason. So now we're kind of back into some of the things we were talking about at the end of book 3 of the Consolation. Okay, moving right along, the second point, okay, the nature of the final end. And here, a couple points are made about it. So again, it's like looking at the first cause and trying to figure out what's that cause going to be like. So the nature of the final end, it would have to be one, it would have to be perfectly satisfying. Otherwise, it wouldn't be final. If we want more, then we want a further thing. Everything is sought for its sake. So he says on page 21, every single good which we pursue, however trivial it might be, or even however distant it might be from what would truly contribute to our happiness, derives its character as a good from the fact that it is somehow related to the ultimate good, which is the root meaning force, motivating force behind all our actions. So this is, if you ever heard people say that everybody who does anything is really seeking God, this would be the reason for that. That maybe they don't know it, but if God is the final end of human life and everything we do is for the final end, then everything we do is seeking God. Even if we don't realize it. So it's not a claim about what people think they're doing. It's more of a philosophical and religious claim about what actually is going on. And then the final point he makes is that this would have to be common to all men. Okay, so we all want to be happy. Again, that's one of those indisputable things. And we were all designed in the same way, so we will all have the same goal. And if God is the only thing that can make us happy, then God has to be that goal. So there is a kind of nice summary at the end of 22 of this. This is probably the most technical part of this. All human activity is end-oriented activity. That is presented as being hard to deny. There is a single dominant end, a final end, which governs and gives meaning to all subordinate ends. That's something that needs to be proven. There was some attempt to prove it. And then our final end is both happiness and God. So happiness is what we see it as subjectively, and God is the actual thing that would fulfill that. Okay, so that's the first two sections. The next two videos, I'll pick this up, and this sets the scene for some of the points in the next two videos that are more relevant, I think, to our question, because I don't think a lot of this Socrates would disagree with. He may disagree about God being the final end. He would, of course, think philosophy, wisdom is the final end. That might just be a semantic difference. That might be an actual difference of opinion. That's something for you to think about here.